Everything's set up, Mayor.
Okay, ready to go? All right. I will call the February 11th, 2025 Urban Renewal Agency meeting to order at 6:04. And reminder that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed, so make sure your mics are on and that you are speaking directly into the microphone so others can hear. I will remind you too that instead of council members, we are directors during the URA portion of this meeting. Sammy, would you call roll, please?
I will. We're going to start with Director Bell,
Present.
Director Bauman,
Present.
Director Engelbretson,
Here.
Director Lyman,
Here.
Director Myers,
Here.
Director Smith, and Director Wells is joining us by Zoom.
Here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hanks, are there any recommended changes to the agenda?
No, Mayor.
No. Thank you. So the business items tonight are, first of all, the minutes for approval from June 11th, 2024, if anyone can remember back that far. So if anybody has any corrections or questions about anything there, then please let us know. Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to approve the June 11th, 2024 URA minutes.
I move to approve the June 11th, 2024 minutes.
Second. We have a motion by Councilor Lehman and a second by Councilor Bauman to approve the June 11th, 2024 URA minutes without any amendments. All those in favor?
Aye.
That would be 6 in favor, and I assume none opposed because there's only the 6 of us. So the motion passes unanimously 6-0.
7-0.
7-0. Yeah, because I can vote. I apologize. I sometimes forget that. I can vote as a director in the URA meeting.
Did you cast a vote?
I will. Yes, I did by nodding my head.
Okay.
Didn't you hear it shake just a
No,
little bit? Rattle. So now we'll move on to the Urban Renewal Agency Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, also known as the ACFR for fiscal year ending June 30th of 2024, and that is by Umpqua Valley Financial. We'll have a staff report by Mr. Hanks.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief on this one. Urban Renewal Agency is a component unit of the city, so it's required that they have a separate audit. And our auditors, Umpqua Valley Financial, are here to run through a PowerPoint. Some of it might be a little duplicative when we will also have some of the same procedures go through for our audit that we'll have at the city council meeting immediately following this. But just a quick reminder from the practical side, Coburg's Urban Renewal Agency is really has very few transactions annually, 3 or 4. The primary function at this point is the property taxes from the tax increment that it creates are transferred annually to the city. And that assists to cover between 30 and 40% of the debt service on the wastewater debt in the sewer fund. So that is its prime function. And the audit itself is therefore pretty small, pretty straightforward. But our auditors are here and can run through a brief presentation for you, and then they will leave for a few minutes and they'll come and do another similar presentation for our larger main city audit later on in the meeting.
Thank you. And are the auditors present?
They are present virtually on the screen.
Present, I am here, yes.
Now, the screen in front of us is not turned on, should it be?
Let me share my screen and let's check that right now. See how it's doing.
I think it may be on, oh, you're coming up on the side.
Got it here. We just need to get this.
You can go ahead and go, but I'll get this on. All right, thank
So,
you.
so,
Got you
so,
on 2 of the 3 monitors here, so I think we're good to go, and we're getting the third monitor going. So go ahead.
okay. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'll try and make this as brief as possible without making it too brief, which is a delicate dance always when you're doing an audit presentation. And you will see quite a few of the slides that are in this presentation reoccur in the city. So I'm going to kind of go through this rather quickly, and we'll discuss it in greater detail when we get to the city council meeting, to the extent that you want. I want to not over present, so I want to be sure and cover as much as is interesting to you all. So if during this presentation there are parts you would like me to expand on more with the city, I'd be happy to hear about that and try and address that during that meeting. But getting started here, this is the audit presentation for the URA of the city of Coburg. And we like to start with a brief explanation of what really this experience of auditing is all about. And focusing first of all on the fact that this is a financial statement audit. It is not a forensic audit where we're looking for fraudulent activity. What we're aiming to do is issue a report that says the financial statements are without material misstatement. There are a lot of audit procedures that are required. Primarily in the beginning, the planning stages, gaining understanding of the basic operations and risk internal control procedures at the entity. We go through a lot of question and answers. You guys get to answer some of those. That's always helpful for us and probably annoying for you, but that's part of the process of auditing, is asking a lot of questions. We have to do our own risk assessment so that we know where we should be focusing our audit. With the URA, as was mentioned earlier, there are not a lot of transactions, so it's a fairly simple process in that regard. We examine the records and documents that are available and do other confirmations of balances, for example, the checking account balance. We usually get some sort of a report from the state and federal agencies that include the payments made and reconcile those to the financial information provided by city council or the city staff rather. We also have to do a fair amount of work with compliance, minimal amount for sure with the URA, but there are state and federal compliance requirements that are part of what we do. Then we issue reports, those required by GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. The first page of the auditor's report we'll see in just a minute here. And then there's a required report that the Secretary of State's office mandates. And then when required, there are reports that are required by the federal government. We also, well, not part of the audit itself, we typically assist with the preparation of the financial statements. That's a little bit of a challenge because we have to be very careful not to impede or impair our independence. We can't be auditing our own work. So we prepare the financial statements or assist in preparing them, provide them to the city staff to review and make them their own. And then they say everything looks good. We finish it up by issuing our audit report ultimately. Remove the word draft from the PDF is essentially what we do, to be honest. But in doing that, we have to assess and make sure that there's somebody at the local government who has the skills, knowledge, and experience to oversee what we as the auditors are doing. And that's the standard rules in the world of independence, and auditing standards for how we maintain our independence, is identifying somebody that has those skills, knowledge, and experience at each of the governments that we audit. This is that auditor's report. It is an unmodified report, which means it's a clean report. There are no material misstatements in the financial statements. If you read through it, you'll see that there are quite a few different sections to it. It's gotten more and more complicated over the years, but it tries to explain what we do, what our responsibilities are, what your responsibilities are as a urban renewal agency, and then goes into some depth in what we're issuing reports on and what we're not, that are contained in the report itself. Single audit, I'm just going to mention it very briefly here. It's a required set of procedures that the federal government has when you spend more than $750,000 of federal sourced money. That gets rather complicated at times, but the URA is not required to have a single audit for the fiscal year 22 or 23-24. Reading the financial statement, again, I'm going to very quickly go through this. I'll spend more time with it when you meet as the city council. But basically, there's the auditor's report, that thing that we just looked at, management discussion and analysis, which is a summary of the information provided by management. It's a rather standardized set of or a bit of information. The GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, has identified what should be in it and what should not be in it, or what it's restricted as to what is in it, and basically only what they say should be in it is what's in it. So a rather regulated, if you will, document there. The basic financial statements include the statement of net position and the statement of activities, which are on a full accrual basis of accounting. There's not a lot to that for the URA. There are significantly more that we'll see in the city in regards to the difference between full accrual and the other statements that are on the modified accrual basis of accounting. So the first two statements that we're going to look at in a second here, the statement of net position and statement of activities, full accrual fund financial statements that are not proprietary, which there are no proprietary funds for the URA. The governmental fund financial statements are modified accrual. Proprietary fund financial statements are on full accrual as well. Then there's the notes to the financial statements section called required supplementary information. This includes your budget versus actual for the URA. And then lastly, the report that is required by Oregon for issuing information regarding compliance. So very quickly, again, this is your statement of net position. It's on page 7 in the report. Assets and net position. There are no liabilities of the URA, so that section is not there. But if there were liabilities, they would show up in the statement. Assets equals net position when there are no liabilities. And just quickly pointing out the net position at the end of 23, fiscal year 22-23 was 116,000. So it went up 50, 60, well, no, $80,000. Get my math right there. Same with the total assets. Again, no liabilities. The next statement is the statement of activities. It is more or less a profit and loss in kind of an upside down and backwards format that's required by GASB. So what we have is the expenses listed first for the program, urban renewal projects. That was the total expenses. If there were any charges for services or operating grants and contributions, they would go here and offset those expenses to get to a net expense amount. We then add to that loss, in this case, the general revenues that include property taxes and earnings on investments, to get a total net change of 90,000 added to the 116,000 that you started the year with for net position, and that gets you to 207,000 for the end of the year. This is the budget versus actual statement that's on page 24. It presents the budgeted amounts for the revenues, expenditures, and beginning and ending fund balances. And then the actual amount is the third column. This, if there were any supplemental budgets or appropriation transfer resolutions, they would show up as a difference in this set of columns here. Actual amounts, and then the variance is the over and under budget. So you were over budget on revenues, under budget on expenditures, over budget on the fund balance, and that leaves you with an excess of your budgeted ending fund balance of 85,000. Pretty straightforward statement here. One of the things that I want to mention real quick is that the GASB folks have decided after 25 years of this format, we're going to add some more columns that, if nothing else, reflect the change, if there is any, in the original and final budgeted amounts. That's a standard that will take effect for next year. So pretty exciting thing to look forward to in the world of financial reporting. There are some other standards that they've adopted recently that do affect a lot of governments that we'll talk about next year when those are implemented. That is it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions. And so I'll close my mouth and open my ears and see what all you might have. Anything?
There are questions. Council Lehman.
I don't have a question about the audit, but I was wanting to bring up that we had previous discussion that it's not required to have the URA as a separate entity, that it could be incorporated within our existing city budget, our city council. Recall that conversation?
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I'm not exactly certain what that would do to our taxing abilities for the tax increment. So procedurally for the meetings or for the
I just
entity
remember that you said there was another mechanism that we could do this apart from the URA.
So one of the, I can answer that maybe. There is a threshold at which any local government does not have to have an audit, but can do well, it used to be a review of the financial statements. The Secretary of State issued new standards for that last year, and now they are allowing for what are called agreed upon procedures. That is less work than an audit. For what it's worth, the size of most for the URA, the audit procedures are minimal. The agreed upon procedures are pretty extensive, almost to the extent that you would have for a URA that has the kind of activity that the city, if you will, the urban renewal agency has. But that is an option for sure. It's a new set of procedures, again, mandated by the Secretary of State's office that we have to look at and comply with. But that may be what you're referring to, is that the audit can be not an audit.
Was that part of the conversation? I know
thought
we
it
had
was-
a conversation during the budget process about the potential for accelerating the payment amounts and, you know, when it reaches its total indebtedness or its total capacity to collect the taxes. I'd have to get back to you to see what the timing was. I don't think we can do that at our timing discretion. I think there are some things that would have to happen before we could do that, but then there's some strategy about would we want to close that out or would we want to keep it going if we were to contemplate modifying what the URA is utilized for. So is that the conversation that you're recalling, that part of it?
No, but it
No?
doesn't seem like it happened.
It sounds from what our auditor said that we really wouldn't save us anything to shift at this point, but I don't recall, I do not.
Yeah, that's just
recall conversation.
Right, that's just whether or not we actually have a component
Right.
unit audit, right? But
Exactly.
it still would be a separate taxing entity. And still would need to have, you know, wearing the hat of the board rather than the council. I think that, you know, until we get to a point where it can no longer, it's reached its total limits of its intended life of collecting for the debt service. And that's coming up, that's close. And I think that's the conversation I'm recalling most recently during the budget process about the timing of the transfers and then maybe accelerating that and being able to close that out earlier than what it could extend to.
Are there any other questions? Directors? Then, at this point, I would entertain a motion to approve the URA Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, as presented.
I will move that we adopt the Urban Renewal Agency Comprehensive Financial Report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, as presented.
I have a motion by Counselor Engebretson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Baumann to approve the URA Comprehensive Financial Report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, as presented. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Better not be. So the motion passes 7-0. Passes unanimously. Okay, Mr. Hanks, would you like to introduce the report and call staff up as needed?
Yeah, this, the second function for tonight, for Urban Renewal, since we try and package these, you have 2 of these a year, is to provide, financial reports. This is the 6-month financial report for, URA for the, not the period that was audited, but the current year that we're in. Yeah, I don't necessarily have any highlights other than, kind of a repeat of what we build up balances in here when property taxes come in. And then at the, in June, we do a journal to actually move them from the component unit over to the city for the debt service. So this is just a 6-month snapshot, and the 7-month and the 8-month will look very, very similar to this. A little more property tax might trickle in, but this is primarily what it'll look like until we get to the point of the fiscal year where we make that transfer. And that's where it kind of gets to that strategy question that we can talk about for next year of transferring the 375, which has been I think the pretty consistent amount, or because it's growing a little bit more, we could transfer more over. It has some pros and cons. We can talk about that at the budget time. Just making sure that we take the opportunity, since you're wearing the hats of the URA, that we give you the financials as well. So we cross that off too.
Thank you very much. So I will remind you that our future meetings for financial portion of city business, the Budget Committee and URA will meet on April 29th, and the Urban Renewal Agency Board will again meet on June 10th. If there are no other items for discussion or questions, I will adjourn the URA portion of our meeting at 6:29. Thank you. And we will just move right on to our regular city council meeting. This will be the city council meeting for February 11th, and I will call that to order at, again, 6:29. Tonight's meeting, again, is being recorded and live streamed, so I'm sure your mics are still on, but again, remember to speak clearly and directly into those. And we are now counselors and no longer directors. So we do have a special guest with us here tonight who is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And that is Hannah Geist. Sorry about that, Hannah. So if you would come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, that would be absolutely fantastic. Wherever you would like to be. The flag is here, so you can lead us wherever you would like.
I'll come join you guys over
All
here.
right, fantastic. God bless you. Oh, sure, introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Hannah Getz. I am from A Truth in Eugene, Oregon, and I'm formerly.
Pledge
Yes.
of Allegiance.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Very,
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, Sammy, are you ready to do roll call for council meeting?
Now we have Mayor Bell,
Here.
Counselor Bowman,
Here,
Counselor Engelbrechtson,
Here.
Counselor Lehman,
Here.
Counselor Myers,
Here.
Counselor Smith.
Here.
Counselor Wells.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all for being here on this really chilly evening. I understand it's going to be we're going to have a little bit more of that and maybe a little bit of rain and freezing rain on Thursday. We'll hope that we don't have a repeat of 2024. I really don't have comments for tonight, except to remind you that I will be doing liaison assignments over the next bit. And so that will be coming up. If you would have any special requests, if you want to stay on the council or the committees that you're on, or if you'd like a change in that, please let me know, but we'll be working on that in the next few weeks and have more time for discussion at our council retreat. So we have agenda review is our next portion of tonight's meeting. Mr. Hanks, are there any recommended changes to the agenda?
No changes, but some modifications, I guess. No, so I guess that is, yes, changes in a way. Just want to note that agenda item number 10, the administrative monthly reports, emailed that document out yesterday, and it's also in the red folder for you. And then the police department quarterlies are going to be deferred. We started to put some information together for the quarter. There was some changes at dispatch that we got a whole, the computer system. So we have a whole different setup for tweaking our stats. And Chief Larson and I went through it and put parts of it together. And it just didn't all pull together to get some good apples to apples. So we wanted to take a chance to play around some more with the data that we're getting from dispatch to kind of make sure it matches up. And then we also found that we are a quarter behind. So we will give you 2 quarters and we'll catch ourselves back up. So that'll be on the March meeting. In addition to the special guests we have for the audit, our finance audit committee and Hannah, we also, I just wanted to call out, we have a special guest here that came in right when we got started, Senator Hayden. So I don't know if you wanted to recognize the senator here. But yeah, great to have him.
Thank you. Coming by as I do with all the municipalities in the Peter, so
Well, we welcome you and we're glad you were able to stop by. It was wonderful to see you in the Capitol on Capitol Day, and we appreciate the attention that you give us. Thank you. So we have lots of special guests tonight, but we also have an agenda. So Mr. Hanks, was there anything else from your point?
Nope, I think I covered those. I hope I did.
All right. Public comment. Do we have anyone signed up? No public comment tonight. So we're now down to the consent agenda. Remember, counselors, you may remove an item from the consent agenda for discussion by requesting that prior to consideration. We have minutes from January 4th City Council meeting and also minutes from our January 28th City Council work session. Does any counselor wish to remove an item from the consent agenda?
Madam Mayor, at this time, I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Counselor Baumann. Do we have a second? I'll second. That was Counselor Smith. Thank you. So we have a motion by Counselor Baumann and a second by Counselor Smith to approve the consent agenda without amendments. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes 6-0. Thank you. Now we really will get into our special guests, and again, we're going to welcome Steve to give us the annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th of 2024 by Umpqua Valley Financial. Mr. Hanks, did you have anything before we turn that over to the auditor?
Just a couple comments, briefly, and a shout out. Greg Peck, our finance director, does the majority of the legwork and the back and forth with our auditors, and just wanted to recognize Greg's work. It's a lot of work, and we're getting better at it each year as we change, tweak some of how we do some things, and updating that with the auditors, and it's great to have Greg be able to handle the vast majority of that, and our goal, of course, always is to turn it around as quickly as we can when they need it and they call out, see a change, that we get them what they need. So it keeps Greg on his toes, and but it keeps the process going. And without belaboring it, I think Steve will cover the city side, which is, of course, the more extensive part of the audit. We're happy with the audit and the management report, and I think in summary, a boring audit is a good audit. So let's see if we can keep it nice and boring. And I'll turn it over to Steve.
Boring is good.
Boring is as boring is, right?
Thank you, Steve.
Yes, and we love to keep people on their toes, by the way, even if it's boring. Right? Well, again, thank you for having me tonight. I do hope it stays warm enough and dry enough that you can get home safely tonight. I'm presenting from the comfort of my office at home. And thank you for allowing that to happen. And thank you, the technology gods that have allowed that to happen too, I suppose. At any rate, as I mentioned in the URA meeting, if there are portions of the presentation you would like me to dive a little deeper into, feel free to either speak up now or when we get to that portion, just say, could if you have some questions, feel free to interrupt, and I'll do my best at keeping it marginally boring still, but otherwise entertain you as best as I can. So this is the municipal audit presentation for City of Coburg. I'm representing Umpqua Valley Financial LLC, the auditors that you guys have now had for a number of years, and we do thank you for that opportunity. It's been a rewarding relationship, and we've been pleased with how this transition has gone through, with Ann Heath having done the finance director position for several years and then stepping up to city manager and then stepping away. And so it's great to get to know Adam and Greg, and we've worked together marginally for me, myself. My staff worked with them more, but the audit went well. And you'll see that we have some things that we still need to wrap up here in a minute, but I just want you to know that we're happy with how things went. And so with that, I'm going to go over the steps that we go through for an audit. And it really does involve a lot of planning initially. The idea behind all the planning is to help us determine what we should be doing, what we should focus on in order to identify any higher areas of risk where there might be errors in the financial statements. And I mentioned before, this is a financial statement audit that we're presenting about, not a forensic audit. Those are two radically different things. Forensic audit, they're looking for bad guy stuff. Financial statement audit, we're looking to issue an opinion that says that the financial statements are something that you can rely on, that there are no material misstatements, essentially. We ask a lot of questions. That's how we get an understanding of what goes on at any government, and with changes that are made, such as what you guys have been through recently, it's important for us to get a good idea of who's doing what, and ultimately what internal controls exist at the government. And internal controls is a complex thing. Most folks think of it in terms of, who's opening the mail and who's recording receipts and who's making the deposits and who's signing checks, those checks and balances kinds of things. And those are important, but they're only one part of the internal controls, this policies and procedures part. There are 4 other elements of internal controls, including the highest level one, the control environment. When we are assessing internal controls, we have to look at what's the attitude in regards to financial reporting and in regards to internal controls related to financial reporting. We very seldom find a place that has a bad attitude about internal controls or financial reporting. But when we do, we know we got trouble in paradise, so to speak, that any other internal controls that may exist probably aren't well designed or well implemented because somebody or many people don't care. But so that's the highest level and the first thing that we assess. The second element is risk assessment procedures. That is really an overlooked process that is designed similar to what we do in terms of trying to find areas where there are potential hazards. It is really an important part of internal controls to consider where the highest levels of risk exist in financial reporting And once you've made those risk assessments, then you can identify processes, the policies and procedures to help minimize those risks. And also in identifying the levels of risk and where they are, you have to make a decision about where you want to spend your resources, the limited resources that you have in the accounting areas and other management areas, how you want to spend those resources in order to minimize risks. The next element is monitoring, and monitoring is crucial, overlooked a lot also. If you have, for example, a policy and a procedure that says we're going to do bank reconciliations every month, that's a great policy and it's a really important procedure. But if it's not getting done, how would you know? Well, because you have monitoring. Somebody in the staff is being presented those bank reconciliations, and not just bank reconciliations, but any other procedures that need monitoring. There is somebody that knows how to monitor, what to look at to see that the work is being done and being done appropriately. Then the last element is about communication. So if something's not working, if an internal control could be designed or implemented better, something could change, then it's important to have communications about that. You guys have a rare thing at the city. You have an audit committee that can discuss internal controls. You as a council can do that as well, but the audit committee might be more inclined to have some time to focus on internal controls. And I would certainly recommend having good conversations about internal controls. This last year, we saw a school district that did not have good internal controls, and as a result, nearly went bankrupt because they had some incorrect accounting being done, not because of fraud, but because the reports were not correct. There was some bad accounting that was being done. And because the reports were coming back to those who make decisions, the decisions were inappropriate decisions because the accounting was poor. And had they had better internal controls, in this case, it was all about some payroll liability accounting. Had the accounting been done right, there wouldn't have been the risk of errors in the financial statements that led to poor decisions. So it's really important to think about internal controls. We most always think, what could go wrong? Everything's fine. You know, the auditors come in and tell us everything's fine all the time. But if something's wrong throughout the year, you need to know about it and be able to make changes to that. So we look at internal controls. We actually have to report back to you if we detect that there are what is generally called significant deficiencies. And that report to you then also goes to the Secretary of State's office, and improvements in internal controls are expected. We did not detect any material or significant deficiencies in internal controls at the city of Coburg. But again, there is always room for improvement. I say again, I don't know if I said that before. There's always room for improvement in internal controls, and understanding all of the elements of internal controls is why that can be a really good thing to have some conversations about. So that's a long-winded story about what we do, but that's an important one as far as I'm concerned, and I wanted to go over that. I'll go rather quickly through these other steps. The other things that we do in performing an audit is assessing our risk of where we may make an error in where we should have spent more time auditing and perhaps not identified something that was wrong in the financial statements. So we have to do our own risk assessment and identify where there may be a greater potential for errors and irregularities. We do have to consider fraud throughout our audit work, but it is not our focus. So always in the back of our minds, we're thinking, is this something, if we find something that looks, like maybe it gets our attention for one reason or another, is it getting our attention because there's some fraud involved, or is it because there's just a report that's missing, or one thing or another? So we don't focus on fraud, but we consider it. If we detect fraud, then we have to report it. And there was no fraud, no anything of any errors or irregularities due to any fraud that we detected, to be clear. One of the things that most people think about when it comes to auditing is that we look at all the invoices, we examine all the records, we dig deep into everything, and we do, but we do sampling of that so we can focus on significant transactions, errors that may be there that would make a significant difference in the financial statements. So we don't look at every transaction, nor do we test for every account balance that's on the financial statements. But we take samples and we verify account balances, such as the bank account balance. We get a confirmation from the bank. We review the bank reconciliation. Some of the bigger account balances we'll talk about in a minute have to do with capital assets, long-term debt, pension liabilities and transactions. And two of the three of those have to do with estimated values. The long-term debt is not an estimated value, but a very specific amount. But we test those, we confirm those balances. We also have to test for compliance. Oregon law requires that we test for compliance for any state funding that you receive. We also test for compliance over about 10 other things that are listed on the report that is required by the Secretary of State. That is at the back of the audit. There may be other compliance issues that we need to examine as well, including federal compliance. Occasionally, we need to look and see whether there's any other local compliance issues that we need to examine and report on. So those are all the different things that we do throughout the audit. Then we issue reports, one required by GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, the audit report that's at the front of the financial statements. Then there's this Oregon Secretary of State's minimum standards report that is at the back of the financial statements, the one that has the compliance language back there. And when required, the federal government reports, single audit reports, they're called, that are towards the back of the report as well. So we issue a number of reports. And again, while we're it is not rather part of the audit procedures, we oftentimes assist in preparing the financial statements. And we do that because it's really a rather complex document to get it to meet the reporting standards that GASB has created. There are always new ones. GASB never sits still, although Lord knows I wish they would for a year. Just stop changing everything, but they don't. So anyway, we do prepare the financial statements for almost all of our audit clients. We can only do that after assessing the skills, knowledge, and experience of somebody that is either working for the entity that we're auditing or has been engaged by the entity that we're auditing, who has those skills, knowledge, and experience to essentially review what we're doing and ultimately what the financial statements that we present in draft form to you, they have that skill to adopt them, if you will, to say they look good, in which case then we remove the draft stamp off of our PDF of the file and issue the financial statements with our audit report. Let's see. So this is the audit report, the first few paragraphs of the audit report that's on page I of the financial statements. It is an unmodified report, unmodified opinion, otherwise known as a clean report, clean audit. We detected no material misstatements in the financial statements, and so we're able to say that. This report is now 3 pages long. It used to be less than 1 page long, but it has, like everything else, got more complicated. It includes a number of sections that detail out what we are issuing our audit report, our opinion on, and what we are not. So there's a fair amount of language in there. There's also a lot more detail as to what we do and what you guys have a responsibility to do in completing the audit. So anyway, that's on page I, and again, a clean report. I mentioned the single audit before. It's the federal government's way of auditing the dollars that are spent by local governments, state and local governments. Any government that spends more than $750,000 in one fiscal year is required to be subjected to a single audit. It's called the single audit because before the Single Audit Act was passed, federal agencies would show up, half a dozen of them sometimes or more, and you would be getting audited all year long for any number of different things. That wasn't very popular, nor was it very effective. So federal government said, let's just have there be a single audit for all this stuff. So that's why it's called the single audit. A lot of extra work goes into this depending on the situation. We have to assess internal controls again, but specifically in relation to the accounting for and the spending of those federal dollars, and compliance with both general compliance requirements that are identified by the government, but also grant or loan specific compliance requirements. We have to assess and test the internal controls that we deem to be specific or that are identified specifically as ones that we need to test. Testing can be anything from asking questions and examining records to gaining additional access to the information and examining records in greater detail and looking at processes for how those procedures were done, what was done to make sure that the city government was in compliance with the variety of compliance requirements there are. And that can be rather frustrating effort sometimes in the world of internal controls related to specific compliance requirements that most folks don't really even know exist, because there are a lot of them, and particularly the general compliance requirements that are issued by the Office of Management and Budget, the federal government. At this point for the city, we are still trying to make a determination about whether a single audit is required. We believe that it is going to be required, but gathering the information, it gets complicated, particularly in this case, and you're probably wondering how difficult can this be? Well, so with money received from Business Oregon, the Infrastructure Finance Association agency, whatever that is, where you guys are borrowing money to complete the water project. Some of the borrowed money that is received from Business Oregon is federally funded, and some is state funded, and some is a match that is required to be spent by the city. And identifying which amounts of the reimbursements or the expenditures that are that then qualify you for reimbursements or loan drawdowns. What percentage of those dollars is actually considered or will we be treating as federal dollars as opposed to state or local dollars is where things have gotten complicated. And it's been a little frustrating with Business Oregon this last couple of years. Like an awful lot of governments and agencies and even heaven only knows audit firms, COVID-19 was a challenge for all of us, and Business Oregon was not an exception to that. And they've had some challenges in getting people back in place that can give us good answers to our questions, which are complicated ones. So anyway, so we are still making the determination. I believe that we're going to be performing a single audit, and then we'll have more questions, more answers. We need to try and get that done before March 31st, and then we'll append those reports and the schedule related to that, the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. We'll append that to the financial statements that you have now, reissue those financial statements to you guys and to the Secretary of State's office once we have that done. So that's the single audit, and as quick as I can explain it. Reading the financial report, just went through it with the URA, but I'll go through this again fairly quickly. We talked about the auditor's report. Management discussion analysis is generally around a 10-page overview of the financial statements and the information included in the financial statements. It explains a lot of what I'm about to discuss next, and also has some summary tables and charts and graphs and such. It also addresses the future budget and any other financial information that might be relevant to the future at the end of the management discussion analysis. The basic financial statements include two statements that are reported using the full accrual basis of accounting. We'll look at what that means in a minute here, but know that that is different from modified accrual, which is what the fund financial statements for governmental funds uses to present as the modified accrual. Proprietary fund financial statements are reported using the full accrual basis of accounting. So just with that little set of statements there, you can see why this is a complicated set of statements, financial statements, and why it isn't something that people that don't do it more than once a year even want to try and tackle, because we have to do reconciliations between what makes for modified accrual balances and then what we reconcile to get to the full accrual financial statement side of things. One other thing on those, the statements of net position and statement of activities are presented on what's called a government-wide basis. The two activities that are there are the governmental activities and the business type activities. But it's for the government as a whole. The other sections, required supplementary information, is where you see a couple of the budgetary schedules and a set of schedules related to pension and OPEB information. Supplementary information is where you'll find all the budgetary schedules for those that aren't required to be in the required supplementary information section. There's a section on other information that includes debt schedules and other reports. There are then the section about legal and other regulatory reports, where the auditor's report is and where the single audit report will go when it's appended, if it's appended to this report. So very quickly here, statement of net position. This is full accrual. It has nothing to do really with your budgetary schedules. But you can find reconciliations to see how we got to these numbers and how they relate to the budgetary numbers in the pages behind the balance sheet and the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance that are a few pages back after this one. Anyway, what's in this is a lot of things. Capital assets is the big one here on the asset side of things. And it's important to know that these, and as this statement here says, the various pension and OPEB accounts are estimates. They're estimates because capital assets include the buildings, infrastructure, the values of your streets, and they are based on the original or historical cost, not current market value. And because a lot of the buildings were created or built or bought or purchased, whatever, well before the year 2000, when we started having to include these values in the financial statements, we had to do a lot of estimating. And the standards require that we use estimated historical cost for these values. So these numbers would be a lot bigger if we weren't using cost, but we're using cost. The other part of what's an estimate with capital assets is this accumulated depreciation business here. There's nothing except estimating that is involved in depreciation. It's the expense, if you will, of the value, the original cost of the capital assets over an estimated life of an asset with an estimated residual value that isn't depreciated. So a lot of estimating going on there. It's important to keep that in mind when you start looking at some of the bottom line numbers. The net pension liability for the city is fairly large, not nearly as large as I see it for schools, but still significant value here. That and the OPEB liabilities and these things deferred outflows of resources related to pensions and OPEBs and the deferred inflows of pension and OPEB amounts. Those are all estimates. We get those amounts from actuaries that do that work, the actuaries that Oregon PERS hires. A company that's been doing it forever called Milliman and Company. We rely on them. We look at whether or not we think they're capable of doing the work of making that estimate. And I'll tell you what, they're way more capable of it than I am because it's complicated. And I would not want to be doing what they do. They're working with billions of dollars and making estimates on future liabilities. Is there anything that you can do about these liabilities or change the values, or is there any reason to want to change the values? Not really, just that's what they are. That's what the estimated amounts are. But it's important to know, again, that those are estimates. That's really it, other than to note that the net position of the district, or of the city, is the net amount of assets and deferred outflows minus the liabilities and minus the deferred inflows. And it went up. We'll look at how much here in just a minute, but in total assets, the first part of this, 38 million, again, a large part of that is capital assets. The next statement is a statement of activities. We talked about this a little bit in the URA meeting. It is the profit and loss, more or less, of the government-wide side of things for the city. Again, expenses show up first, offset by what are called program revenues, charges for services. The utility businesses, the utility companies, if you will, the utility funds. This makes more sense as far as charges for services and what the expenses are and what the net income, if you will, looks like. The governmental side of things relies heavily on general revenues, which are presented down below, that offset all of those expenses that aren't covered by operating grants and charges for services usually. Ultimately, you get down to the change in that position, 383,000 for the governmental activities, 391 for the business type activities, increase in both. So a total increase in that position of 775,000. Again, this has nothing to do with your budgetary values, fund balances. And where you want to go to look at those is behind the notes to the financial statements. The general fund being the first one you'll see on page 65. A much more familiar format with revenues first, expenditures, transfers, and then the change in the ending fund balance. Budgeted amounts, original budget, final budget, which includes, in this case, there are some changes. For example, in the Public Works Administration, where you guys adopted either supplemental budget or appropriation transfer resolutions that altered those numbers from what was originally adopted. The third column over is the actual amounts, and the final column is the variance, the amount over or under. This set of numbers here in the expense side of things are what we look at close enough to decide whether or not we need to report it, where you would be over expended on your appropriations. You are over expended in the economic development side of things. It's not a significant amount necessarily in relation to the total spending of the government. So we may or may not, I don't remember if we did or not, identified that as a non-compliance issue. If it's immaterial, then we don't necessarily need to report it. Anyway, that is it from me. I appreciate your attention and would like to know if you have any questions or comments.
Counselors, any questions for our auditor?
Is anybody awake still? Oh,
Well,
that's,
Yes.
they are all awake.
Oh,
I am
good.
looking at them and all of their eyes are open,
that's
but
good.
you have not generated any questions.
All right. Well,
Uh,
good.
So I guess we'll probably have to let you go.
Yeah, that I appreciate that. And thank you for getting me on early. I appreciate that as well. I do want to thank you guys that are on the council and you, Mayor, for the work that you do, your community service. And I'm going to make a recommendation that you give yourselves a 100% pay increase. And that should fit in your budget still, as you well know.
We are always very cognizant of that.
Yes, yeah. At any rate, my hat's off to you guys. It's not an easy or necessarily fun thing that you do there, but it is a really important thing, and I appreciate that. I spent 5 years on the City of Roseburg Council, so I can sympathize with you a lot. It's not an easy task.
You know of what you speak.
I do. I do.
Well,
Anyway, thank you all for having me. I hope things are safe getting home for you all, and have a good night.
all right.
Thank you.
You too, Steve.
All right. Bye now.
Okay. Well, that's always riveting.
I have to say my paternal granddad has a degree in accounting. So this was not, now he studied general accounting, but these were not altogether foreign concepts
Right.
for myself, so that helps.
The more you see it, the more you do tend to understand about it. So after hearing these presentations for several years now, it's like, okay, I sort of am starting to get this. But I'm glad that I'm not an accountant. That is not my strong suit. Okay, well, we do have some special guests, as we've said before, and we're happy that you're here. Senator, is there anything that you would like to say to us about what's going on in Salem that we should be aware of?
I would just say that there's a lot going on in Salem, more than I mean, I'm gonna make a building of it. You have questions. That's, that's what they would do. What's the, that's what's there for? Secretary side of things. First,
Yes.
is there, what we can, is, because of, places to look at. See,
Mhm.
you don't get a, probably,
All right, thank you. Yes, we are acutely aware of some of the mandates that come down and we go, whoa, wait a minute, how can we afford to do this? So, thank you, and we will be in touch, trust me. Hannah is here and Hannah introduced herself earlier and led the pledge, and I believe you have a presentation for us tonight. All right, let's hear it. Would you like to come up with Mr. Hanks, please?
You want to sit?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so my name is Hannah Gus. Like I said before, I am from Troop 452 in Eugene, Oregon, which is Scouting America, formerly Boy Scouts of America. And I am working to achieve the Eagle rank, which is the highest rank that you can earn in scouting. And it is highly coveted. It's hard. So in order to earn the Eagle rank, a scout must lead a service project for their school, church, or community. I chose to do a project to benefit my community, Coburg. To do so, I decided to design and install welcome signs for the city of Coburg with the help of City Hall and the community, of course. I have just begun the design process, and I'm hoping to bring our community these brand new signs within the next few months. And keep an eye out for posters online and around town with more information and how people can give their input on some designs and get involved in the process of it.
That's very exciting. And Megan Dompey is here representing Main Street, and I think she would be a great person to loop into this also.
Megan and I are already connected.
All right, well, there you go. Well, I should have known. Well, fantastic. I'll be anxious to see those. I think I can speak for the entire council and say we'll be very anxious to see those and work with you.
I'm really glad to hear it. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you. I don't think so. Does anybody have any questions for Hannah?
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
We need more young people pulling their weight. I know it's a bit cliche, but the young people of today are the leaders of tomorrow. So keep up the good work. Thank you very much. And maybe in a few years' time, you could be behind this desk.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well put. Thank you, Councilor Bowman. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Hannah.
thank you so much. It's great to meet all of you. Thank you.
One of the flyers is at the front door of City Hall. So there's a QR code too to scan for a survey for community input. And I think Megan is helping distribute those as well to as many places as we can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we'll move to ordinances, resolutions, and contracts. First item on the agenda is the second reading of ordinance A-163-V, an ordinance adopting the Oregon Criminal Code, Oregon Uniform Controlled Substances Act, the Oregon Liquor Control Act, and the Oregon Motor Vehicle Code repealing ordinance A-163-U. So, Chief Larson, are you going to, talk to us about that? As you recall, the first reading and public hearing was held January 14th at that city council meeting. And does anyone have any questions before we start? It over to Chief Larson.
All right, pretty straightforward. It's an annual requirement to have the ordinance that adopts certain vehicle codes, Controlled Substance Act, Motor Vehicle Code, which allows us to write citations into the Coburg Municipal Court. This will replace ordinance number A-163U with A-163V. Be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions from council? Hearing none. Did a great job. Thank you. I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve ordinance number A-163V. I consider it read for the second time.
Right. Thank you, Counselor Bowman. So do I have a second? I'll second. Second by Counselor Smith to adopt ordinance A-163-B, an ordinance adopting Oregon Criminal Code, Oregon Uniform Controlled Substances Act, Oregon Liquor Control Act, and the Oregon Motor Vehicle Code, repealing ordinance A-163-U. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Hearing none opposed, the motion passes unanimously 6-0. Thank you. Of course. Fantastic.
If I can say very briefly, I've been to the municipal court many times, even when I was much younger. They do tremendous work in terms of not only making sure people are held accountable when they come here, but making sure that everybody truly gets a just outcome and reasonable treatment, fairness. People are always treated courteously, and I think they do a great job, as does our court administrator and our judge.
You were acquitted each time?
Interested observer.
I was gonna say, I think he came in as an observer,
Yes.
not as,
No, otherwise I could be on the council if you're in the job.
That's true. Thank you, Counselor Bowman. So now we have, wait a minute here, I've just lost my track. Let's see, I think, Mr. Hanks, I think you are up with the staff report on resolution 2025-02. Oh, yes. Thank you.
So, staff report and review. From last year, we did that.
Right. So, Mr. Hanks, I know that under transportation on number 4 is the Public Works Operations Center Fuel Center. Would that tie in with the solar capabilities also? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Counselor Lyman.
So just clarification of the capital improvements plan in terms of its process for implementation or not implementation and funding. So for example, if we look at the Pioneer Valley Estates Distribution System underwater, number 6, the funding source is federal grant / water revenues. So when something is placed on this, it's sort of like a goal, a placeholder for a future project. I'm assuming if it's not on the list, before a project could be initiated, that's a capital improvement project, would have to be approved by the council to be placed on the list or removed from the list.
Yeah, it definitely has to be approved by. Here is doing. Right, so this is really a forecasting. Project. Some projects. Combination. Obviously.
I appreciate many of these projects are long-term and multi-year and that we are mapping those out, so.
Our goal really is the next round.
It seems like there's a couple of projects that are, if this one's approved, then this one isn't necessary, like the hook up to eWeb, for example. If that were done at, what was the cost for that, $9 million? What would go off that would be not needed because of that?
Well, that would be useful analysis. That would be used.
Council Engelbrechtson.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I'm just curious, kind of at what point, or as we all know on the council here, we're talking about how years ahead are going to be challenging for our budget. Whether, you know, we may need to look at cutting some expenses or raising more revenue, as we've talked about previously. Hopefully not this current year, but down the pike as we look at the projections. So my question is more about kind of process or timing, and also thinking about, I think one of the big levers that we have to pull is our capital projects. And do we want to, you know, postpone some of these? Can we postpone some in order to help us so that we're not, you know, overspending, you know, or going in the red, so to speak. So when are we, when is the right time to have maybe some of those type of conversations as a council? Is that, or do you envision that at the retreat?
Whoops, we have a different mechanism, you know, we have rates for water and wastewater, and we're mandated to use rates as the funding mechanism for streets and for parks. We don't, you know, we have some, you know, we have some revenue tools in the street side that we don't have in the general fund. But we have kind of a more limited set, you know, we don't have such a straightforward connection between our revenue options and the capital expenses. So I'll get to the wastewater conversation is probably the next one we'll have. We had the water one in July. We'll have a wastewater conversation when we get our capacity analysis done that Kennedy Jenks is doing for us right now. We're probably at the 90% mark on that. So I foresee March or April having a capacity analysis report for council on wastewater. kind of vaguely or very high level takes into account the 107 acres. It doesn't have solutions for the 107 acres, but it will identify what our capacity is and gives us tools for better estimating what types of EDU equivalent dwelling unit impacts will happen on the industrial lands that will tell us how much we have to be ready to do for
Is that
capital.
answering your question,
I
Councilor?
hope. I'm trying not to go around it.
Or
but-
can we go into this at more depth at retreat?
And that would be fine. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of levers that we do have to
Right.
pull, and we just say, oh, yes, let's do all these projects,
Right.
and then later regret that we didn't scrub them a little more where we can. You know,
Right.
obviously, if there's regulations, we can't.
Just a moment.
Yeah. So
Counselor
So
Smith?
with what Counselor Engelbrechtson said, I think I look at this and there are things that are mandated that we have to do. And with some of the budget issues that we know we're going to face, I think just as a group, it would be helpful to look at areas and prioritize projects in those areas so that we're all kind of on, the same page, and maybe looking at the surveys coming in, public input. It just helps to it helps me to kind of have my ducks in a row, just like at home. I know there's things I have to do, and then there's things that need to be done, and then things I want to do. But when I look at a public document, it's a little bit harder for me to say, oh, this is a want, not a need. But I think it would be helpful at some point to prioritize the capital improvements as to what has to be done, what we have way on, like Kathy. So as we go forward with looking at budget, we know what our priorities are, and then look at how those maybe line up with citizen input now.
And I think that was something that we were going to really try and do at retreat, was the prioritization, as I recall.
Well, yeah, we were talking about prioritization of the full work plan.
Right.
Of the CIP, this is the prioritization right here in front of you.
Okay,
So
with
this really is it. So don't approve it if you don't agree with the prioritization. I guess is probably the blunt way to put it. And especially water and wastewater, these match our master plans, right? So we have prior master plans. This is the order of operation that is that the master plans that we've had done by our water and wastewater experts, it puts them in this order. Now, we've already, from that master plan, they've already been kicked out in the years, that's the usual, right? Is that they get the date that we think that we want to get them done. It moves down based on how long it takes to get funding, how much funding we get compared to the increased cost of the projects. We've talked about that a lot. But for water and wastewater, they pretty much are. And actually in the streets, the street list is from the pavement management system primarily, saying the worst streets, from the scoring, the pavement management scoring are the worst, the lower the score they have, the closer, the more near term on the list they are. Now, a couple of these we've looked at a little bit of movement based, and this is part of the other part of the strategy that is different than I think both Councilor Smith and Councilor Engelbrechtson that you guys are talking about, is a little bit of chasing funding. So we prioritize projects that we also know are viable for funding. So on the street side, the ODOT SCA, the small city allotment grants, those are for paving only. They have some parameters. So something that may be a worse street may not be eligible for that funding pot. So something that's SCA potential funding might jump it on the list because it's got an external funding source potential. So that's one of the things that influences the order of this. I would say that the two categories that you have the most discretion and that Brian and I talked about the most are the first two, administration and parks. That's where our most acute revenue issue is. It's general fund. So I wholeheartedly agree, and I think our survey work that the broad survey I'll mention in the city administration report and follow-up conversations definitely I think those two categories are key because those are, you know, discretionary for the most part. I mean, we would like to have heat in this building, so it's only sort of discretionary, but what we do with it, you know, how extensively we go about solving for that, you know, there is some movement, and we've already kicked that 2 years. So at a certain point, equipment doesn't keep deferring with our fingers crossed that it goes away. You know, but if you look at parks, is a great example. We have kicked everything out. 2030 plus is really more of a conceptual order, placeholder of order, because we recognize that there aren't any funds. You know, finishing Coburg Creek Park, we split that into 2 years. We still have a lot of conversation to be had there, both with Park and Tree Committee and then on to council about what that really looks like. The reason it's even there is we have SDCs. It qualifies for SDCs. If we didn't have that, we might have nearly 100% of parks out in the 2030 plus. So I think that's what the staff side has been trying to do to organize this for you, is exactly what you're talking about. The tough one really is this in the first one, administration, general government. There's some important things in there. They're not super high dollar, but there's important things, and we do not have funding identified for that. We're really going to struggle with figuring out how to accomplish those. You know, some we've kicked, you know, further down, and we can keep kicking because it's mostly aesthetic. But there are some things that just flat out, you know, those have to be considered too. And we're trying to grow this list to be realistic also, because we have some that I think we've talked about collectively and definitely on the staff side that weren't on here. And we're trying to add some of those, especially these miscellaneous ones. Those are budget killers. If you just kind of, they're out there, and then we finally pull the trigger, and then it really rocks a particular fiscal year's budget. So that one is the hardest from a being able to fund it. And you can see general fund taxes and fees. That's the only real funding source. Very unlikely for any other source than our challenged general fund.
Councilor Lyman.
Well, to put it in perspective, if I understand this correctly, the issue with our budget a year or two down the road is mostly general fund. Correct? And the general fund is only 1.3% of the total $29 million on this budget. It's only 405,000. So only 8 projects are under the general fund. All the other ones, 74 total, the other 64 are funded by sources that are grants or SDCs or taxes. So I think, to put it in perspective, the majority of this is funded outside the general fund, which is where the issues.
Correct, which is pretty typical. You know, the heavy infrastructure are in the enterprise funds. The general government stuff is, it's city general facilities, city halls, and parks. And then, you know, streets, we do have revenue streams for streets. We also have some debt service, but we have some movement there. We have conversations with our revenue subcommittee about street specific funding sources. Transportation, you know, at the state and federal level is a heavy hot topic, as we've all heard. That one is, you know, it's from the staff side, that's challenging, but because we don't have the regulatory pressures and the growth pressures on that we are forced to do, we do have some of that discretion that you're talking about to push these out, and we continue to. And of course, the further you push them out, they turn from rehab streets to reconstruction streets, and their cost goes way up between rehabbing and reconstructing. But sometimes that's what you have to do, and it's not the preferred and most economical, but if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. And we're pursuing, there's the STIP that's coming in this summer that Megan and I just were talking about what we want to put forward to the MPO. There are some funding mechanisms which again might jostle the order a little bit on this. But this is, you know, this really is the prioritization that really needs to happen for the system to work. We have to, on the water side, we have to make the loop connection a priority for the system to work right. That's not a growth thing. That's a system working correctly thing. And so they are in order. And again, like the fuel center, that's a smart one for us, emergency management, but it isn't an operational dollars thing. It's going to be probably grant or nothing. And we hold, and we just keep getting creative on finding funding sources.
That was helpful, I think, too, when looking at the dates, and then also, you know, it's a plan, nothing is set in stone. You do it as you have funding and as you have the means to do it. So I'm comfortable with having the plan, knowing that there may be some things that will drastically change as we go forward.
Yeah, and clearly the goal really for us is to get everything on here. And that's why I even caught that solar one. It's like, we need to get that one on here just so we know what all is potentially in the hopper from it helps us then when we come to you later, even to ask to apply for grants. Like, yes, that's one that we've talked about. It's on the CIP. Remember that, just so we're all on the same page. So yeah, it is a planning forecasting document. And then of course we do plug these into the budget and show the upcoming year and at least the 2 years after that. So we see, and we want to overlay those with debt service that we have currently. So we know how much debt can we even take on, even if we're eligible for debt programs, can we afford it with our rates? And then there's the rate pressure question that is a annual conversation, when we're talking rate increases.
I want to say, just for the benefit of anybody who may be watching this now or watches it later, this is obviously a difficult dance for all of us to do, because we all understand that if we had our druthers, we would do all of this immediately, and it would all be done, and we would look much better than we probably do in the eyes of the people who put us here. However, that's not the way it works, and I just want to reassure people, we hear you. Believe me, I'm sure all of us hear you. We hear what you have to say. We're listening to you. We get it too, because we live here as well. We hear you. We're listening to you. And to some extent, we agree with you. We wish it was easier. But it's not. And it's not like a house budget. So, unfortunately, in order to do the right thing for the city, we sometimes have to look like the bad guys, but that's part of the dance we have to do. And I just want to reassure my constituents, and by extension, all your constituents, that we do take your feedback into account. We hear you, we listen to you, and we're having to do a very difficult high wire act.
Mayor, I'm ready to propose a motion.
Okay. Is there any other conversation, questions, discussion? Not? I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve resolution 2025-02, adopting the 2025-2031 capital improvements plan as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Counselor Lehman and a second by Counselor Bauman.
Mayor
to-
Bell, could I add if there's a chance at amending the motion with the
Oh,
solar project
yes,
I talked about?
thank
It's
you.
not the end of the world, but if there is a willingness,
Yes.
I would love to.
Yes, of course.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much
thank you.
for
I
that.
didn't get a second yet, so I'll just repeat it. I move to approve resolution 2025-02, adopting the 2025-2031 capital improvements plan with the addition of the solar
Project at the wastewater plant.
Second.
Yeah,
project
at the wastewater plant.
at the wastewater plant.
All right.
Second.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion by Counselor Lehman and a second by Counselor Bauman.
Okay.
To approve the City of Coburg Comprehensive Financial Report for the fiscal. No, I'm sorry. No, we're doing the CIP and we're doing it as amended. Here we go. I dropped down one. Apologize for that. So, we're moving to approve the resolution 2025-02, resolution adopting the 2025 to 2030 capital improvement plan as amended, adding the solar project to the wastewater treatment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Counselor Wells, are you still on the line?
That's snoring.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I had it accidentally muted. I am in favor of that.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's getting pretty late where you are, so thank you for hanging in there with us.
It's fine. Thank you.
So we have the all in favor is 7 and 6. Thank you very much for the count. I am obviously
Yeah.
losing track here. With none opposed, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we have the annual comprehensive financial report, which was already given to us by our auditors. And are there any questions for staff? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the City of Coburg Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, as presented.
I move to approve the annual financial comprehensive report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024.
Thank you. Counselor Bauman has made a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Counselor Myers. All those in favor of passing this motion, please say aye.
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 We have 6 ayes, and assuming no opposed, the outcome is unanimous, 6-0. Thank you. Now we have the administrative information reports. Mr. Hanks will go over that information and answer questions as needed.
Yeah, actually in that general category, we have several things. We deferred the police report. We have the administration monthly that's in the red folders, but we also have the council rules. We are hitting 8 o'clock, and I don't know what everybody's desire is, but we had. I'll quickly note, we had a much more extensive audit presentation than last year, and maybe there's a happy medium between last year and this year, but I'll get that input from y'all later. But
This was the typical this year.
this was more like you've seen in the past, okay? But we can hit any of the above you want and defer any of them to the next meeting. I can hit quickly the administration report highlights, or we can talk council rules.
We can go forward, or we can end. We need an approval to move on forward.
At this point, I will move to adjourn because it's getting late. And I think we all could use a break.
Did we get any feedback on the council rules that we need to?
We did. I had some good stuff from Counselor Lehman. We added some language from that conversation for draft in the document that you have. I think, again, this is a set of rules for you all to really feel comfortable with. I think between Sammy's work and the input we've received and with the mayor and I think we've bolstered parts from the last draft that we had in front of you all. So if there are, any individual comments you have before the next meeting, we'd be glad to tighten it up even more. But I think we're getting closer. And again, it's not a massive hurry for you all. It's just, it's your operating rules and want to make sure that we understand them, we're comfortable with them. So we can amend again slightly if more information comes in to help get a great product at the end. If we are getting close to adjourn, the only things I had on the on here that are fresh that I didn't put in the community survey that we have with U of O, item number 2, that survey will launch tomorrow morning or tomorrow. I won't say morning, tomorrow. So we'll see that on our social media work and it's an online survey. It's using Qualtrics. But there'll be some paper copies available as well. So just wanted to say that that's hitting the streets.
Was there anything on the financial report that we need to pay attention to? We've listened to a lot of finance today.
Yeah, I think things are tracking generally well. I think you'll see that we've talked with Finance Audit Committee, in the facilities, general fund facilities department, it's a small total number, but it's showing a higher percentage. That is indicated in some of the costs that are captured there get distributed out to the other funds. So that will kind of right the ship. We're changing how we do those, and we're going to try and do those quarterly instead of at the end of the year because it makes it look funny until the end. So we at least want to hit those quarterly, so it won't get as far out of whack. But that's the one when you look at the budgetary compliance, the percentages are a little wacky looking. But otherwise, everything's tracking. It's close, but it's tracking.
I second Counselor Bowman's motion to adjourn.
Were there any questions on the administrative monthly report that came out? And I do appreciate that you sent that out yesterday for us to take a look at.
Yes, that made it much easier.
Good. I'm going to try and keeping that earlier and earlier.
And
So,
I would say quickly, I appreciate all the work you have done and our city recorder has done on the accommodations front. That is appreciated.
Well, I think everybody aims to please and it works for all of us. Okay, in terms of liaisons, again, let me know if you want to continue where you are, or if you want a new assignment for this next year. I'll come up with those and those will go out to you in March. Is there any other pressing business? Everybody's looking bleary-eyed.
There's Parks update, but I won't be at this meeting. The Parks meeting, they're going to do a work party in Viper Park on February 17th at 9 o'clock. If anybody's interested in helping or learning how to prune roses, that would be a good one to attend. We're going to do that. And then I had suggested that with budget that the Parks Committee look at parks and come up with some priorities they feel are important for the next few years moving forward. And then they're also working on medallions for the Veterans Park, mostly looking at 2 maybe different options for where the medallions will be placed and how, taking into consideration Mr. Hank's input on vandalism and upkeep and durability. So that's still in process.
All right. Thank you. All right, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I will adjourn the city council meeting at 8:05. Thank you. That's hard for me to listen.
Well, look at it. I'm sure you were very smart to begin with.
Class on